Thyself is dedicated to the exploration of the most rewarding task an individual can ever embark on, the journey to find oneself. Our intention is to investigate the universal principles that have equipped our species to seek the treasure of all treasures, self-knowledge. With your hosts, Daniel and Eduardo, this is the Know Thyself podcast. Good to see you, man. I'm so glad you have power now. So I was hoping we'd do more sessions from the truck, but at the same time, I'm glad that you're in a more comfortable space. So
absolutely,
let's go,
man. Let's do this. Should we start this off?
Cool, man. Well, welcome to the Know Thyself podcast. I am Eduardo, and I'm here with Daniel.
Hello.
And hey, man. Like I said, it's good to see you in the space that you're in right now. And so many things to talk about, so many things that we brought up in the previous episode, always, once again, using the story of Hercules, but also, doing this introduction of, the sign of Libra that we'll be talking about today, but also really taking an in-depth approach as usual, and also having a conversation with you about it. Because again, I save most of this information and whatever I study and whatever I listen to and all the things that I bring up, I'm just like, okay, just wait, make some notes, try not to let it be all scrambled, and find a way that's easy, not for me only to ask you these questions, but have like a flow when I talk to you about it. Because there's always so much. So, in the previous episode, we obviously brought up the labor, but also calling the episode that you titled so perfectly with that internal justice. And so there's a lot of reasons behind that, and talking about equilibrium and balance and everything that Libra represents, but why it represents equilibrium and balance, and what that really means, from going from its opposite, which is Aries, which is like me, into we, and talking about what that we really means, that together, the thought of not just working together, but understanding like what an opposite is and bringing a balance within that opposite. And so let's go ahead and get started, man.
Absolutely, man. And this is the sign of balance. And one of the things that we really should address, I think, right off the bat with Libra is this is the sign of our journey to finding balance. So when we talk about balance with Libra, some Libras, individuals that have strong Libra components, they might not so much feel this homeostasis, but Libra represents the journey to find this homeostasis. And so we're going to be at different levels of balance on our journey, and as we kind of continue through, but that's what the sign really entails. It's that journey to finding that balance and to finding that middle ground in between what we perceive as polarities. As we kind of get started, the big theme that we're going to be kind of thinking about today is Libra, and the journey that we experience with Libra is the validation, because we know deep down inside, at the source of all life, at the source of creation, it's wholeness and it's complete and it's all encompassing. But in order for us to perceive in this conscious reality that we're in this five sense reality, the wholeness had to be separated into positive and negative. It was the only way for us to perceive consciousness, to go on this evolution of the soul's journey. To have form, we needed the positive and the negative. So that universal spirit had to separate itself into a positive and a negative. And in that process of separation, we perceive it as opposites. And it's through Libra that we learn to reconnect these and find the whole in between, and find our way back into the holiness, which is wholeness and the completion of this. And this is what the Libra strives for. It knows that, it sees white and it sees black, but it knows it's the same side it's just the opposite side of the same coin. And we start to understand how polarities can actually lead us back in the blending of polar opposites into that middle ground. That middle path is actually what brings us back into the path and the way, that all of the prophets showed us from Jesus to the Buddha. Whether we talk about the middle path of the Buddha or we talk about the way of Jesus, it's very much this balancing between spirit and matter, and how we kind of balance those two scales, or balance those scales in our life as we kind of continue this spiritual journey that Hercules is on, as well as ourselves.
I'm really glad you brought it up into the esoteric rather than the exoteric, as far as the wholeness you talk about and the balance that's true about, between this, these two sides of the same coin. And really with the definition of homeostasis, I like that you use that as well. Physiologically speaking, that's an importance in our body that we can't, always have control over, but our body knows how to regulate. And I think that's a great thing that we should strive or understand to strive for with the soul. And that's what Libra really is doing, because finding that symmetry, but finding the equilibrium is really the equilibrium of, you just said it, between the above and the below. And so right on, man. I know that exoterically people understand what balance is and why we would, bring up that idea of keeping balance. But, it's said that the definition that you're bringing up, that I really want to get in depth with, or in a conversation with you, is more of this, obviously the esoteric definition of this balance, right? But I always think it's interesting that when people, do their research and try to find out, I had this thing with symmetry that I wanted to bring up. But it's in all areas of life. And that wholeness you're talking about is what I really want to talk about today, is like what that really means. And so,
yeah, absolutely, man. And, talking about symmetry, talking about homeostasis, and one of the first things that I always like to bring up when I'm talking about Libra and the experience of balance is a very interesting thing. Nobody in the history of the world has ever mistaken something for being balanced in their hands that was unbalanced. You feel it immediately. It's not like confusing your left hand with your right hand. Like if you're like, hey, give me your right hand, and I give you my right hand, I give you my left hand, you're like, you silly goose, that's your left hand. And then we have a laugh.
The other hand.
Exactly. Nobody's ever mistaken something from holding in their hands and being like, oh, I didn't know it became unbalanced and fell out of my hands. You immediately have this reaction that kicks in, and it's this awareness that kind of comes in. And it's this internal aspect of ourselves of like this deep, like almost instinctual impulse in our spirit and our soul that's even beyond our consciousness, that thrives for balance and the uncomfortableness of being off balance. And it's this sensation that is perceived and received by the consciousness of the brain immediately. And we have a very unique interaction with it. And I think that that's what's going to be such this pressing thing, because we're always looking to maintain this and find this balance. But Libra really teaches us that that's a journey. It's the path today might be balanced, but tomorrow you might find some like rocks and the terrain might get a little bit more dangerous. How are you going to maintain that balance? So it's very much this adaptability, and bringing in almost like this cardinal air sign into it, of even like the new thoughts that come that create more stability and balance, the new awareness we have of incorporating and unifying the left side and the right side of our brain brings a new balance. And so it really is like this unique kind of mark of some more spiritually higher thoughts that will help kind of maintain and sustain balance for the remainder of this journey, because the seventh sign in the seventh house marks a very interesting point in the soul's journey, because it's like the interlude before the sun starts to travel into the underworld. And so it's almost like the place of like where the hero stops and they see the darkness that they're about to enter. And they have that moment of, do I continue or do I keep things just as the status quo as they are? And as we're going through this journey, this is when we're really going to kind of call in that Aries bravery to push us beyond what the balance of the box that we feel now, but to actually break that container and connect to the balance of that internal balance that we're really kind of looking to garner through this experience of going through these zodiac houses together in this journey.
Yeah, you're really standing between the spiritual and the material, and you're kind of having to make that assessment right there and then, which I thought was very interesting. And something that I really want to talk to you about, of course, is that, you talk about what it represents with Virgo and Scorpio, and how we're kind of in the middle of that. And so how there's a little bit of both that sort of make up the energy of this sign. And I thought that was fascinating when you and I were debriefing a little bit, that I'm like, let's stay on that, because again, back to this understanding of balance, there's the exoteric and the esoteric conversation that we can have that regards that definition rather. But this is the definition that I want to get really into with you, is what that really means. And even though we sort of brought it up in the previous episode, I think now would be the time as we would move in closer to Scorpio as well,
Absolutely. Yeah. And you're right. We're talking about the relationship that happened between the separation of Virgo with Scorpio, when those signs were separated and Libra was added in the middle. That's exactly what we are encountering. And in Virgo, we bring spirit into matter. The Christ consciousness is taken into the womb of life. And so we bring spirit down. In Scorpio, we're going to raise matter into spirit. And we're going to actually do the opposite. In Libra is the balancing in between. It's the interlude in between these two activities. And it very much represents almost that contemplation between those two energies, and how we're going to kind of make that balance and that creation kind of happen. So it's really going to kind of bring into balance this two-sided force of duality that's kind of represented with Virgo and Scorpio, and it's that coming together right here. And again, this is something that is part of the evolution of consciousness as personal relationships have heightened in their importance in the individual's life. There was a need for this isolation and an identification of this archetypal energy in its own housing unit, so humanity could perceive it and incorporate it further in this consciousness evolution.
Ooh, I like that. Yeah. Again, back to one of the conversations we had, and I'm so glad I'm going to bring it to this now, is with relationships, and the importance of that understanding in relationships with not only just the understanding of what this balance is, but also how to internalize a lot of this and find out that it's okay. You were saying this earlier, to even have a friendship with its opposites, and bringing the middle ground to that relationship and what that really means in that balance. And so if you want to elaborate more on that with regards to the thing I said in the beginning, with me turn into a we, really understanding the we in the relationship and what the balance really means for that Libra energy.
Yeah, absolutely. And, one of the things that, as I was kind of reflecting on my notes in the last conversation, I didn't really make the distinction when we talk about relationship. I was like, this represents friendships, this represents romantic relationships, and like single serving friends is what I called them, like meeting people on the bus or the train, business partners. But this means any kind of relationship. This also means your enemy. Libra doesn't see a distinction between enemy and best friend, because it's just a relationship. Libra doesn't represent the in-between. It represents what the relationship is. And so your enemy is a relationship to Libra, just like your best friend is a relationship to Libra. It's about that kind of separation. And that very much will expand and give us this understanding why Libra is such the sign of not only learning, but also teaching. And what do you do in a relationship? You learn in your relationship, and then you also teach in your relationship, and you also guide the other individual, and then they guide you. It's this coming together. It's these coming together of opposites. And one of the things that we really want to foster in our spiritual development, and really this is kind of gets this is really what expresses with, because Venus just represents relationships. It represents the coming together of two things. So like we spoke about,
Mm,
I remember when we were speaking about Venus in the past, it's like the paintbrush coming into connection with the canvas and the relationship between the two that's going to create art, right? And so Venus just represents kind of all relationships. And like when we kind of get to the more of the esoteric, and again, esoteric meaning inner teachings, the deeper aspects, it's going to be represented by the planet Uranus. And this is really going to kind of give us this focus of an interest and aspiration for right relationships. And we can see that relationships actually can be an alchemical
okay.
furnace for us, for the, to speed up our own evolution, to speed up our ability to love and even experience empathy is going to kind of come from this. And we're really going to start to see the right relationships as, really jumping off points for us to spiritually grow and to learn about ourselves and to see that mirror on the wall. Well, that mirror on your wall is your friendships. What do you see? What comes from your friendships? What comes from your relationships? What grows out of these is very much what this Libra is going to represent. And it's through this experience with other people that we learn compromise. We learn how to peacefully coexist with other individuals, and also how to most appropriately express who we are. So it's this learning thing and it's a teaching thing. We teach people about who we are and we learn about who they are in this really interesting kind of blending. And when we look at spiritual relationships, we really just look at individuals that expand the understanding and our connection to that universal life force. And so we spoke about it before, but we sometimes limit ourselves in our guides and the individuals that are kind of on this path to lead us, because we have like a set definition of what we think our friends should look like, or what we think our romantic relationship should look like, or even what we prescribe as like a spiritual teacher, when Libra is going to tell you that it's going to come in all shapes, all sizes, and all different kind of levels. And so Libra really kind of asked you to not so much judge somebody if you have all of the same likes, but more of like, how does my soul feel around this individual? And can I authentically blossom? And does this person authentically blossom around me? And that's really the key that we're looking at, a deeper rooted relationship that's more, in a spiritual understanding, rather than a relationship that's going to be based in maybe desire or codependency. And that's what we see is if we don't go through this the right way, if we approach relationships through Scorpio, we're going to see a lot of desire leading the relationship. If we don't have a balanced Virgo going into the relationship, we might fall into codependency. And so it's all these, it's almost like the blueprints are dropped for the next one to come. And it's a more complete understanding of why we went through those experiences in the previous house. Like the funny thing about traveling through the zodiac is the house that you're in really makes sense once you move into the next house. Because you're like hearing about what the house entails and people are like, okay, so a lot of the times when I'm explaining the sixth house of service to people, they're like, okay, I kind of get it. And then when we move into the seventh house of one-on-one relationships, all of a sudden what I'm talking about, they're like, the sixth house of service makes more sense now that you're explaining the seventh house to me, because they build on each other and they kind of continue that story. And that's exactly what we're kind of seeing. It's this Libra, this pursuit of balancing the scales of equals, equal, but yet opposite. And how do we make that equality come in the middle? And how do we kind of find that middle path and that gray zone that we're kind of talking about?
I love, the gray zone, man. We talked about that in the previous episode with just the color gray. But, one thing that you said, well, many of the things you said that really resonates with me is I've always appreciated your metaphor when you were talking about Venus and you're talking about how there's the hand and there's the canvas, but it's what's really the marriage between the two and the understanding of the one who carries that tool onto canvas that paints the image that is necessary. And if, too little of one or too much of the other, even if you have the tools to paint the canvas, they can be painted in in a negative sense. They can paint an image that creates even further complications down the road without the understanding of, this impulse that they might have if they lean too far into, in this case, would be so sort of that Scorpio energy of desire that not necessarily is bad. You need desire just like you need ego in order to, go after that which you not only want to be incorporated with, but you have to have an understanding and respect for it also, because it can sort of take you down a path that you didn't really mean to. And this is where you need to learn this, is in this balance, this gray area right now that you find yourself in order to have that understanding, if that makes sense. And so every time you bring up an analogy like that, and that's a good way for me to learning, which is what I wish I would have had you as a teacher in middle school, but this is way better. But still, your analogies or metaphors are something I can relate to very well. But that's my favorite, of kind of understanding what we mean by that middle ground, because it's easy to say between the material and the spiritual, but understanding what both really are in order to operate from this standpoint, in that very symmetrical middle point, or that line that razor edge you were talking about, is what really counts for this, to have this understanding. Because what you said about knowing people and knowing ourselves is so key, because this is why we do this, because we're trying to sort of show all the perspectives and all the understanding that someone might have of another that they don't really agree with. But it's okay if the soul understands this is what we're going to do in order to make this, tool bring to reality on this canvas, this image. You know what I mean? We're not going to really worry about whether or not the canvas is, in agreement with, the harshness of the brush that's going to be stroking the canvas. And the brush isn't worried so much about, whether or not the canvas has enough space to have the painting. It's really about what the message is going to be delivered between the two, once there's a clear understanding. Does that make sense? I just like taking your analogy a little further is really all I'm doing, is that it really just sort of opens up that perspective for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, it's spoken as the razor's edge or the tightrope. And it's this unique awareness that is only guided and understood through this connection with, like we were speaking about with the deeper sign of Uranus, as this internal justice, and this internal direction that is guided in this. And the idea that balance is not going to be something that's going to be externally found and then internally created, but it's going to be more of an internal aspect that's going to move out. It's going to begin within and it's going to move out. And it's this dual nature coming together and blending together that is like this new insight for us as we're going through this approach. Because with an air sign as a cardinal air that we have with Libra, it very much represents like this new wind of change and this new breath of ideas that gets connected to us. And our thoughts, although when we think about the trivium and it's thought, emotion, action, thoughts do come first, but we speak about the generation of the heart that actually raises us up octaves to what kind of levels of thoughts that we have kind of coming in. And what this is going to entail is, as we approach this balance, the purity of our thoughts are going to be creating a new insight and a new awareness into ourselves that is going to help us as we travel into the underworld. When you look at the sign of Libra, it truly represents the setting sun, and it's representing the death of the sun. It's the death of the sun god as it's now going to start to travel into winter. And what this new insight does is it almost gives us the thoughts and the awareness that will be needed to go and to survive this journey into the underworld. And there's something very special about this air sign. Where do your thoughts come from is what Libra is going to ask from. The more balanced you are and the more clean and whole your aspect of consciousness is, the more holy your thoughts are going to be. Where do your thoughts come from? It's the same kind of thing with like the direction of the wind. when you say the direction of the wind, you don't say where the wind is going. You say where the wind is coming from. Oh, the wind's coming from the north. You don't say, oh, the wind's going to the south. Where do the thoughts come from? Well, this Libra is actually this birth of this new higher thought that comes from the planting of that Christ consciousness seed in the womb of all life in Virgo. And with just even the carrying of this Christ consciousness womb, it's starting to change the thoughts of the individual that carries the Christ consciousness. Just like when a mother who is starting to gestate a baby talks about how their thoughts and their actions and even their emotions change as that process of carrying that seed of life. Well, it's no different in the seed of all life that's within you. It starts to change you, and you start to see this new higher aspect of more pure balanced thought coming in, rather than us feeling like that squirrel who doesn't know if it wants to cross the road or not. And so Libra can be a very challenging sign if that internal homeostasis has not been established, because the scales are just always moving. It's always just getting adjusted, and we can't ever really find our path.
Right.
But does that make sense? So as we go through this process in Virgo of planting that seed in the Christ consciousness, well, it opens up a new direction of thought energy that's going to be directed to the adept that's going on this journey. And so there's just this new balanced awareness that even comes. And, think about in your life how important balance is for your spiritual development. It's going to tell us, because there's a rush when we get into spirituality that we kind of want to sell everything we have and just like follow the Grateful Dead cover bands around and sell macaroni necklaces outside of their concert. But you slowly learn that like, oh, this isn't fulfilling my material needs. There's like, I'm hungry and I don't have shelter. And so there's these qualifications needed for spiritual development. And that's going to be like covering your basic essentials like food, water, and shelter. Not going to lie. Although, when you're in like a dangerous situation, you still speak to that universal life force, but you don't really have time to think about the alpha, the omega. You're not really thinking about what was the esoteric interpretation of the myth of Cupid. You're not thinking about that when you're in a dangerous situation, like let's say like trying to survive a flood or a tornado or a natural disaster. You're not thinking of this stuff. If you're out of a home and you don't have a place to sleep, you're not really thinking of like the deeper aspects in life. And so what Libra is telling us here is like, for us to entertain these new higher thoughts, we have to have balance and stability. And there needs to be an inner harmony so we can approach the most beautiful thoughts and these new awarenesses that could be presented with Libra. But without the balance there's nothing that's going to kind of come from that. It's kind of like the idea of, you can work out your arms all the way, right? You can just do whatever arm exercises there are. Obviously, you're seeing the screen. I don't do enough of them, but you could do a bunch of arm exercises, right? And you could make one of your arms like the biggest arm in the world, right? And just concentrate on it. Actually, like Navy sailors back in like the 40s, they would have a lot of jobs where sometimes they would have to be in one position, but only one arm would get a lot of the activity. So you would see sailors that would have like a huge arm on their right hand and a really small arm on their left, because it was like how their job and how they were positioned, they were only moving that one. And so you can build strength, but if you don't have balance for strength, it's going to be offsetting. It's not going to look aesthetically pleasing like Libra desires things too. And it's not going to have that symmetry of what we consider beauty, but it's also going to be harder to operate. Like, yeah, if it's always arm day, it's going to be fine. But if you don't do leg day, you're just going to tip over. If you have no like legs, like, thigh muscles and stuff, it doesn't matter how big your arms are. The person's just going to like push you and you're going to fall over and you're not even going to be able to get up. You're just going to be this big, bicep that's rolling around. Balance is everything. Balance is the key and the foundation of strength. There's a reason why you balance the foundation of the house before you just start building on top of it. Balance has a strength that, you only know when you're out of balance. You don't know the strength of balance when you're in balance. It's just a flow, and it's just how you operate. Balance, the strength of balance is only really known when you see the opposite duality of it being out of balance. And then all of a sudden you see just how important balance is.
No, and that's, I mean, talking about injustice, we're talking about injustice, and having an understanding of the internal balance is not just obviously important, but when we're talking about, what it governs as far as, having that understanding of what that balance means, if you're going to be moving into, an area of desire, and in this case, whether it be the physical objects you want to attain in order to survive, that you're talking about the survival, like money, and having to pursue that, but not having a balance of it, it can not only consume you, but it can also not work for you. So even if you have the wealth in order to survive, you may not be eating, you may not be taking care of yourself, and you may be dying faster than you would like to, just trying to get to that, one-sided mission, and having a complete understanding of it in that balance is what's going to bring, the right balance, what that balance means for the person is bringing. Because I want to go back to what you said about when you're trying to survive, the last thing you're going to do is like take your time and look into some kind of esoteric lesson that you're going to relate to the situation. You really want to find your survival and connect with the higher source pretty rapidly, but having an understanding how to get there quickly between that balance is what's going to really access the potential that you're looking for in order to survive in that situation. And that's what I'm saying about being out of balance. If you're in the pursuit of, like, say, something like wealth, and it's good to need to have wealth in order to keep the physical form alive, but you also have to take care of that spiritual that we talk about. So yeah.
Absolutely. And especially when we even think about, and again, we have an air sign, and air signs, just like Gemini, there's an aspect of almost the androgynous nature with the air signs. They blend the positive and negative forces with more gray rather than black and white like the other signs. So we have an interesting sign with Libra, because it actually it's a masculine sign, which is very interesting, because people think of Venus and they think of beauty, they think of symmetry, and these are all very much component aspects of, like, the feminine aspect of consciousness that you would say. Again, masculine and feminine is within all of us. It's something that's within us. But you would think that, like, and even when you think of Libra, I remember when I was first getting into astrology, and I had like a calendar that had like really cool art, and it had like a ram, and I was like so excited when I like went to Libra, because I was like, I wonder what this is going to be. And I remember being like, oh, Libra's it's a masculine sign, and it was a man, and he was in green. But he had like feminine features to show that this is what this sign is kind of representing. It's the balancing of that masculine assertiveness and the Venus harmonization. And it's the balance of these two energies, and it truly is the balancing of the masculine and the feminine within us. And it's the balancing of that left side of the hemisphere of the brain and the right side of the hemisphere of the brain. And it's this unique kind of, again, almost androgynous feel, just like we had with Gemini with the twins. That was going to be more mutable. And we talk about how that is, Gemini is one that it's really hard to kind of say, because it almost can blend between it because of that Mercury kind of energy. Well, Libra is going to represent that now with its blending between Venus and that balancing force energy of that masculine energy. So really kind of interesting. This is the cause of synthesis. This is the cause of coming together. This is where relationships are formed. This is the me out there. This is us seeing ourselves and outside. And we spoke about how our one-on-one relationships are such a key factor of expression of things that are hidden within ourselves, whether it's hidden things in our shadow, but also it could be things that, like, our desires and interests that we didn't know, that were only experienced by the interaction with another sovereign individual. And what kind of comes between that beautiful blending of when the me in here meets the me out there.
Absolutely. Yeah, and when you talk about going into the underworld, I think about how it's, this is the turning point where you must be prepared, or at least prepare yourself to know the separation between the fall and the rise, and having that really, internal idea of what that represents, and keeping the balance between the two, because the fall is coming, the darkness is coming. You're going into the underworld, and the sun is dying. But you're also like understanding before you go into that one sided, and this might be black and white that we're talking about in oppositions, having a great balance in that gray is what's going to allow you to, let at least the soul evolve to the next octave, to the next level, because it understood what that fall was and why we rise now again. But you're not just rising in the same place you were before, the year before. You always want to be expanding and growing, but I think this period that we're in right now is really crucial to sort of making that foundation that you talked about. It was beautifully said how, if we're going to lay a structure onto that foundation, we need to understand balance. No matter what you think you want to do creatively speaking, it starts with that, And so,
Right.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, absolutely. And, even when we're thinking about the natal chart, and I know we've already kind of spoken about the seventh house representing one-on-one relationships, both good and bad, like we were speaking about earlier, and partnerships and business partnerships. But the seventh house also marks a very unique space for us to all explore, because the seventh house is actually what you call the descendant. It's the opposite of the ascendant. The ascendant was the beginning of
Right.
the first house, and that was the moment you took your first breath. And the descendant is going to be the moment you take your first breath as you go into the world of form, which is the world out there, and the external, which is the underworld to us. People think when they think about the
Right.
underworld, they think about like going down into Dante's Inferno. The underworld is the five sense reality form, where everything dies and has to get sacrificed to live. This is
Right.
the underworld. Like, we're experiencing it in this external reality. It's not saying that this is hell, but you can definitely make it hell if you're unbalanced and we're not passing through these rites of passage that Christ consciousness calls and yearns for us to explore. And so this seventh house, for whoever is studying this, whether you have whatever your seventh house entails and whatever is represented there, this is a balancing force for you to balance your ascendant energy. Because remember when we spoke about the ascendant is your original relationship with consciousness. And so it's very hard for you to perceive. It's not like your sun sign. It doesn't unfold and blossom and shine in front of you.
Right.
Your rising sign is like, it's come as you are. It's how you came into this reality. And it's hard for us. We can kind of learn about it, but it's not a thing of development. It's not the hero we become. It's the journey and the lens we see through to become the hero, which will be the sun sign, wherever our sun sign is. And so what this descendant is going to allow for us to do is, again, take a look at what our shadow produces, what we don't see that's under the surface that creates events and circumstances into our life. And the descendant is really going to help us balance out our rising energy, And so, like myself, I'm a Cancer rising. That will put Capricorn on my descendant. And so I'm usually very emotionally kind of sensitive and empathetic, where Capricorn's going to come around and it's going to be like, discipline, stop feeling so bad for yourself, and stop being a little whiny baby, Daniel. Capricorn's going to kind of come around and like assert that father energy to balance out my Cancer rising, right? And so yourself, you are a Scorpio rising, right? And so your descendant is Taurus. And it's through one-on-one relationships that you kind of get pulled into form, and you actually can experience the beauty of this reality, and you can actually experience the beauty of the five senses. And you can it's through friendships and dating people that you will go to sit at a fancy restaurant. If I call you, if I just call you and you're traveling around, you'll be like, oh, I'm going home to like eat, and then I'm going back out to run this errand. Now, if I call you and you're with Lindsay, your wife, you guys are you'll be like, "Oh, we're at this place and we're going to stop for lunch and we're going to eat at this cool restaurant. There's this cool balcony." I will never catch you at that place though by yourself. It's either you're taking your friends there or you're taking Lindsay there. You're like, "Oh, if it's for myself, I don't need to experience the I don't need to get it all dolled up." You're like, "I'll just wrap anything in a tortilla, like a tortilla, and I'll just eat it, and that's my lunch." But in one-on-one relationships, all of a sudden you're down to wine and dine. You're down to experience the five sense reality, and that's what your friends do. They actually pull you out of that, and they pull us out of this like Scorpio burning desire energy of go go go. And it allows you to sit in the grass for a minute and like eat grapes and look at the sky. And it's one-on-one relationships. Your descendant is actually what kind of helps do this. And so our rising sign is such a unique thing. Our ascendant is such a unique thing because we don't perceive it as well. We think everybody operates this way, but it's not really true. You know, that's the lens you were looking out on the playground, and there was 11 other, signs running around bumping into each other. And so what this descendant does is it affords us this unique understanding of seeing the other side of the coin, of seeing the other story. Libra is the idea of walking in somebody else's shoes. When somebody's really into Libra and they're fully in this Libra balance, they're great mediators. They're really good at compromise. They're very diplomatic. But it could actually get a Libra in trouble sometimes, though, because they're so diplomatic. Because what happens is, say you're the Libra in the situation, and I'm like, man, like Sean and me were hanging out, and then he did this, and me and him got mad, and now we're mad at each other. And I'm like, and I can't believe he did that to me. Like, he just left me at the restaurant. And you're like, oh, that's crazy, man. And I'm like, yeah. So do you hate Sean too? And you're like, well, no. And I'm like, what? Why don't you hate Sean too? And you're like, because I see your side of the story, but I also see Sean's side of the story. And like, if somebody doesn't have that Libra balance, they're like, you got to make a choice right now. The Libra's like, I'm not going to be able to do this. And so Libras are actually like really good mediators, but sometimes it could get them in trouble because they don't have a tendency to like get polarized as much. And they try to actually make themselves depolarized where they don't bounce around like pinballs like other people do. They see all multiple sides of stories. But it's very interesting because sometimes people like need us. They want us to like take a side of a story. And it's like so hard for a Libra. Like a Libra's always just like, well, like, people are like even like when a Libra kid is watching Tom and Jerry as a kid. Yeah, they're like all about the mouse getting away. But the Libra's like, but man, that cat's hungry. And his like soul's broken because he can't catch this mouse. And so they almost feel for Jerry, or is it Tom? I forget. No, Tom's the cat. That would make sense. Tom cat. Duh, Daniel. Look at us just picking up that. So Tom is the cat, right? The Libra could actually like almost feel for Tom a little bit. Because it's a balance thing, and it sees two sides of the story where everybody else is just rooting for the little mouse to get away. Libra's like, but what about the other side? What about the other half?
Right.
And that's what it does that. And it gives us the capacity to do that. Like, we don't think about seeing two sides of story as a spiritual experience, but it's the beginning of the spiritual experience, because what we're going to start to see is it's not just two sides of the story. It's like a fisheye. There's multiple angles, but it's all coming from the same source of energy. And that's what we're starting to see. We're starting to see the God in your eyes is the same God that's looking out of my eyes. And that's what we're going to kind of get connected to. And that's why we really kind of harvest these relationships. But Libra really is this unique kind of balanced approach of being able to look at two sides of situations. And Libras know about this. When their friends are in fights and they want people to take sides, the Libras don't do it, especially when they're really inside and connected to that archetypal energy. And there's something really beautiful about it. And we spoke about it last time, with Bugs Bunny. But depolarization for a Libra is key. Find balance so you can create balance, and your life will very much become this more balanced, almost like Zen-like approach that we see in highly spiritual people. And it's rooted and comes from this archetypal sign that we're discussing today.
Absolutely, man. I've seen both sides of the same coin, in an intellectual way is definitely, something that aids a Libra in finding the true middle between one or the other. And that's why, being ruled by Venus with love and beauty and everything else, you're right. Some people might kind of get lost thinking that that's the only way, but it's really just the ability to have portions of that understanding from the energy, from that planetary energy rather, that allows you to see both sides of your friend's story, is that you're coming from it from a good place. You're not just trying to be an aloof and say, well, I can't take this side or that side because I don't want to. It's like, no, hey, my heart is in both, so I'm going to go ahead. And I think, last time we were talking about this in part one, you brought up how we would talk about Bugs Bunny, but I'm glad you brought him up back again because we haven't really talked about that. You said we talked a bit about the gray, but the white in the middle, in regards to his colors, but you kind of already talked about it with the androgynous idea, the idea of like having the ability to kind of be in both at the same time and to let the situation aid you and not necessarily go against you. And that's what he would do in the character through the Looney Tunes, which is Bugs Bunny, is that he was probably the most adored character, but we all kind of got to witness an individual take a situation and balance it back out versus just leaning into one full force over the opposite force that's trying to either capture him in this case or the antagonistic force that's after him. He was more than just a protagonist in his character. He really kind of was like, hey, you know, this is the situation I've been put into, but let's have a little fun by kind of finding a way out of it that's not just full force onto one side of the scale.
Absolutely, absolutely, and you're right. It's Bugs Bunny very much, and I know we spoke about it more in the episode way back in the Wayback Time Machine on polarization. We spoke about Bugs
The
Bunny,
Wayback Time Machine,
right? And back when we were
yeah.
babies, it was like baby's first day out in that era. I mean, it's still baby's first day out with us in the podcast, and that's what makes it great.
Yeah, man.
But yeah, that middle path
Slowly
that we're
but
kind of
surely.
talking about, slowly but surely, right? And just watch it, especially the old classic Looney Tunes episodes. He doesn't react. He stays zen, and he just lets everybody else bounce around. It's just like the pinball. Everything's bouncing around. It's the pendulum. And the pendulum is always just changing, and we don't see that the pendulum gets pulled on us from one side to the other, and we think we've got a victory, and then it goes back to the other. What Libra learns is resistance is assistance. Libra learns about how to actually really circumvent some of the problems that were experienced, but you actually generate energy by resisting something. This is why a violent protest is never going to have the same kind of thing you want. This is why a bloody revolution very rarely creates peace, because it starts the pendulum and it just starts moving over. And so this is what Libra is going to look at. And all of the prophets all speak about balance and finding that zen and finding that balance in between. It's the most quoted thing. And if we actually look at the action and the lifestyle of the prophets, they live in a very like Librian nature, between this world and what's next. They live in the spirit, but they're also still got their feet in this reality. It's like our head in the clouds, but our feet rooted in the ground. Is that unique thing that Libra kind of happens. And with this, Libra individuals, a lot of times, because they have their heads in the spirit and their feet in the ground, there's a social grace about them. There's a unique beauty about Libra. Libra risings usually have very symmetrical faces. They can very much connect to what's noble and true. They could have a high sense of justice and balance. We kind of speak about Libra representing the battlefields of the physical reality, which would represent law, money, and sex, and how these are aspects that we have to kind of find internal balance with, or they'll eat us and they'll destroy us, both money, sex, and the law. If we don't have a balance with those, they can be highly destructive. And if we do have a balance with it, they can be highly generative and protective, and when we think about law here, we think about human law, but take it deeper, because natural law is completely ruled by Libra. What is natural law? It's balance. So we perceive that hurricane that we just went through, we perceive that as chaos. No, that was the universe restoring, that was Mother Nature restoring balance. And so there's natural law is all about finding homeostasis and that connection.
Exactly.
And so Libra represents that. And, we could even say that Libra very much represents like the law of karma, which is kind of like, and even in that, the idea that like every action has an equal and opposite reaction. That would be Libra as well. The balancing of the forces, the balancing of the seas, the flow in, the flow out, the waxing and the waning. Everything is whole, and we have opposites, but it's just perceived opposites. And it's more, levels is more what we can perceive that as.
No, well said, man. I'm glad you brought up the karmic balance, because that's essential. I mean, we talk about being in between the below and the above, and what the underworld is and the material, and how we try to reach the spiritual. But to really have an inner balance and understanding of that karmic balance, all of nature can be said is operating from that standpoint, and you can really bear witness to that, especially when you are in wilderness. It's like you're the only one that has sort of this choice to kind of step outside of that. But if you look at the harmony that's going on all around you, that's all from that inner balance we're all trying to reach as well. Yet we have this beautiful choice to kind of figure it out while we're in this physical form and step out of that balance. And part of it is for survival, of course. You know what I mean? We have to create a different path for ourselves in order to survive within this realm and stay within that homeostasis that, does have us working a little harder in the material, but we also have the choice to step out of that once we have found that balance in the physical in order to reach the spiritual. And I think that's when you don't take things for granted, because you're like, hey, I made it to this point in order to restore balance and in order to find inner peace and ascend the way I'm meant to ascend, because I've taken care of one portion of the half, which is the physical. And that might be from your career standpoint, or your relationships with you and your friends or your loved ones. And once you have that piece there, now it's easier as the door opens for what's above you to start being, also part of that in that homeostasis that we all strive for in nature. You know what I mean? So, yeah.
Awesome. Love it. Love it.
Balance. Yeah.
Balance.
And what's funny is every time we talk about Alice Bailey, dude. Every time we talk about the story of Hercules, right when we started, there's still these lingering components for me, at least in the story, in the lesson, with regards to the sign we just broke down in part 2. But you haven't had enough time to sort of let everything settle. Things are still a little murky. You're still kind of looking across the pond from the ripples you created before there's clarity, and just letting it be. And I find that, days after we converse, because it kind of allows us to both have an idea and express each perspective. But then you kind of look back at the labor again and you go, okay, balance. I understand. It's difficult, with whether it's a myth or whether it's a beautiful story that's, so ancient, or even when the Egyptians talk about some of the information we haven't even discussed here yet, you're trying to take it all in at once, and that's not how it's meant to, I think, be interpreted. And I think that having these conversations is not only a beautiful thing with you as a friend, but also for me to kind of understand what the true meaning is. And the labor, I think, is doing that to you in a way that you can take it for what it is, but you can let it sort of sit for a while, and it kind of all sort of ties in together in a beautiful way. So now that we sat here today, it's kind of like, I'm like, oh, I don't know why I was so insecure about my questions with the labor in the seventh house and what this meant and what that meant. And can we talk a little bit about Venus? And there's all these things. And then as it kind of settles in and you read a little more, it kind of all sort of unfolds naturally. And yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, this is definitely, Libra is one of those ones that it's kind of that interplay and that interlude in between. And it kind of calls for space to take. It's not an active sign like Libra. You don't approach it like Aries. It's like this, almost like you sit with it, and it's like this balancing of these energies. And then as you kind of get more balance with in the feeling of how this sign is supposed to operate, more internal realization kind of comes up to where we see it. And it's just like, oh, it's this interesting insight, but it doesn't just like shoot out at you like Aries, we even spoke about that when we first did the Aries episode. Going from Aries to Taurus, I remember you talking about like it's a differently like it's like a different kind of flavor of energy and information that you're getting, and that's exactly it. And this is a balanced middle path Zen approach that we're kind of looking for in Libra, but so key, and it's so key on the journey that we're about to go through. And this is almost the rest before they start to ascend or descend, however you want to look at it. But this is when the hero almost rests and kind of sees what's coming, and kind of approaches that and remembers to see things from all angles and both sides. And Libra can also show us about the ability to think outside of the box, see things from a new angle, and kind of bring in new thought and new insight with that cardinal air. Remember that the wind comes from, we do the wind by the direction it comes from, and it's where our thoughts come from, and that's generated by this Christ consciousness seed planted in Virgo. And so again, Libra makes Virgo make a lot of sense, and then Scorpio, which will come next, will actually help Libra and Virgo make even more sense. They really need to be understood in three together, and a component together. And so I'm excited to kind of continue that conversation with you as we approach mysterious underworld of Scorpio.
Yeah, I can't wait. I can't wait to talk about Scorpio. That's something that's for me always been misunderstood. Libra always has made sense to me. Having my sun sign in Gemini, I just think, and also being an air sign, there's qualities to Libra that I've always sort of related to in regards to both sides of the same coin, or having a middle path at times. And so talking about Scorpio will be something that I've really kind of, you're right when you say it's misunderstood, and we're kind of going into the depths to understand, what it really represents and what that energy really means for us, for all of us.
Yeah. And I think it's Scorpio. Its misunderstanding comes from the inability to see the amount of levels in like death and rebirths, and it's like eternalness, and I think Scorpio gets misunderstood when we perceive it in its lowest expression, and its highest expression is what we're going to be looking to afford to. And it's just if you've listened to this podcast, you know that I have a deep fascination with Scorpio. And what's so interesting about Scorpio is a little different as we kind of make our way to it. It's not like the other zodiac signs, for the fact that you study the whole zodiac and you learn all 12 signs, but Scorpio is actually its own study in itself. You study just Scorpio. Scorpio is the sign of the esoteric. Scorpio is the sign of the occult. And there's a lot of information, and it's going to be dealing with, rather than balance and homeostasis like we spoke about today, it's gonna connect more with cycles and patterns, and we're really kind of starting to build up this entire operation of what it means to be a human. It's not just about analyzing. It's not just about balance. It's not just about cycles and patterns. It's all 12 of these energies. You are Jesus at the Last Supper table, sitting right in the middle, right next to Libra. And these are the 12 humors of these energies. And your goal is to balance all these energies at this table so you can walk through the door that only a human can fit through in the Last Supper. And that is the door in the middle of the room. to represent the middle path. And that's the only way through. It's through the eye of a needle, is what the camel has to travel through. You know, a lot of roads get us to this path, but it's a very narrow gate to enter. It's a lot of roads to heaven, very narrow gate to enter. You have to walk, the door to get into heaven is walked through a razor edge, a wedge. And that's what it's detailing. It's talking about Libra and how we have to walk that tightrope to connect and become the people we destined were to become.
Preach. I love it, man. I love talking to you, dude. It's always so great because, and I look forward to that. I really do, you know, and I know you mentioned in the last episode about getting back to the tarot, but the tarot also is extremely useful as far as a guiding light with all of the energies that we are talking about and what their expressions represent. And I think I can't wait. Well, I know I can't wait for the tarot series again, but this is all just becoming just more and more, you know, just added to the process of understanding, not necessarily myself and who we are, but who everybody else around us is. You know, I kind of like how you talk about the playground of 11 signs running around, and, you know, having a true understanding of what each of them represent can only help you get through that razor edge door, that middle path. And so exciting stuff, man. You know, I know that you've been putting a lot of work into, you know, your situation where you are right now in Florida, but also, you know, very thankful to your efforts on not just meeting up with us here on the podcast and doing these episodes, but making the space and the time to also even upload videos to the website. And if you didn't know already, I mean, the website is in full force, full effect, thanks to Karina once again. And, you know, Daniel has taken most of the videos that we had on Patreon, and we have already merged them over to the website. So if you're not a membership, or if you don't have a membership now, or if you're not a member, you know, you can still take a look at the website and you can still join, you know, the forum, and you can see what we're all discussing about. And if you want to take a deeper dive into the information my friend over here has to say, you know, it's all right there. You know, for you to expand on some of this with other individuals that are like-minded. And that's what makes it really cool, is that we're all students of this information, but, you know, everybody brings something unique to the table. And I think that, you know, after these episodes are recorded and after we produce each series or each season, you know, we gather more and more information that we're able to have these fluid conversations with brilliant people like yourself out there. And it's a great honor, man. It's a great honor because I guess it's just you and I here, but it's so much more than that. You know, with everyone else that understands not only where we're coming from, but what we're trying to attain. And so I never take it for granted, my friend.
Oh, it's the greatest honor in the world. And I love what you said there. Love what you had to share. And excited. I'm excited to kind of move forward with the Tarot series, as well as we both kind of gain a little bit more stability, and, you know, and everything else that's going to kind of uncover in the future. And so, yes, be on the lookout. We should be internet. Today is the first day that we actually have consistent power. And so I'm looking to start uploading a lot of videos, hopefully as like early as tomorrow. And this is an episode that's actually being done for recording, for publishing in the future. And so those videos should already be up by the time you hear this voice, now that I'm thinking about it.
Oh, that's exciting.
Isn't that exciting, man? We're a step ahead finally again. We're back on this good path. You know what I mean? Which is always so nice.
Yeah, we are.
So absolutely, man. Well, it's always such an honor to be able to have these conversations with you and everybody in the audience. So, you know, all of our love.
All of our love. Well, until next time, my friend.
Until next time, my guy.